There comes a moment in every believer's life when God whispers, "It's time to move." Not because you've finished what you've started, but because the place you're standing in no longer serves your spirit. You've tried to be understood, to be accepted, to be seen. You've explained your heart to people who only came to misunderstand it. You've poured love into places that could never return it. But now heaven is calling you to pack your bags, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, because where God is taking you next, you won't need validation, you won't need applause, you won't need anyone to agree with you to know that you are chosen. For too long you've lived in the shadow of people's opinions. Their silence made you question your worth. Their absence made you feel invisible, and their rejection made you wonder if you were ever enough. But God was using that rejection to reposition you. Every door that closed, every friendship that faded, every opportunity that vanished, it wasn't punishment, it was preparation. God was breaking your attachment to external approval so that your confidence would be rooted only in Him. You see, validation is a prison. It traps you in the cycle of needing to be liked, needing to be praised, needing to be seen. But when God elevates you, He takes you beyond the reach of human validation. Because what He's doing in your life is not up for public opinion, it's divine assignment. You may not understand it now, but the loneliness you felt was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to detox you. God had to pull you away from noise so you could hear His voice clearly. He had to remove the constant need for approval so you could learn to walk by faith, not by feedback. The silence was sacred. The isolation was instruction. Because in this next season, you will move without explanation. You will walk in rooms without seeking permission. You will speak truth without worrying who agrees. This is what it means to be free in God, to know your worth without needing the world to echo it. Some of the people you wanted to bring with you into your next season can't go, not because they're bad, but because their presence is tied to your old identity. They knew the version of you that doubted, that sought validation, that second-guessed every step. But God is calling you into a version of yourself that's anchored in purpose, not popularity. So don't be afraid to pack light. Leave behind the opinions, the guilt, the need to explain yourself. You don't need to justify what God is doing. You just need to obey. Because obedience will take you farther than approval ever could. There's a reason you no longer fit where you used to belong. You've outgrown the environment that once defined you. The conversations that used to feed you now drain you. The spaces that once felt comfortable now feel confining. That's not pride, it's transformation. When God enlarges your capacity, small rooms become suffocating. And so He begins to stir your spirit, making you uncomfortable where you are, not to frustrate you, but to prepare you for transition. Every restless night, every heavy sigh, every unanswered prayer, it's a sign that you're being called higher. You're not meant to fit in anymore. You're meant to be sent out. Understand this. People's validation was never your fuel. It was only your distraction. You thought you needed their applause to feel seen, but God has been watching you in silence, keeping record of every act of faith, every tear you cried when nobody noticed, every time you kept going when you wanted to quit. That's the kind of validation that matters. The approval of heaven, and now heaven is about to announce your arrival into a place where your worth won't be debated, because it will be undeniable. The people who once overlooked you will have to watch as God highlights you, not to prove them wrong, but to prove His word right. You are stepping into a chapter that doesn't require constant affirmation, because the work God is doing in you will speak for itself. You won't have to chase recognition. It will find you. You won't have to beg to be seen. Your light will make it impossible to be ignored. But first, You must release the craving to be validated. God cannot take you to a higher level if you're still addicted to people's approval at the lower one. This is a spiritual detox, a cleansing of the soul, preparing you for divine promotion. So yes, pack your bags, not with clothes, but with courage, not with possessions, but with purpose, not with memories of who hurt you, but with faith in who God is calling you to become. The next chapter of your life will require a quieter kind of confidence, the kind that doesn't announce itself but simply walks in obedience. Because where you're going, you won't need validation, you'll have revelation. You'll no longer chase what once rejected you. You'll attract what's aligned with your destiny. This move isn't about geography, it's about identity. God is taking you to a place where you'll finally see that you were never waiting for approval. You were waiting for your appointed time. When God begins to remove you from where you no longer belong, it often feels like chaos at first. The walls that once felt safe begin to close in. The people who once felt close begin to drift away, and the comfort you once found in familiar routine suddenly feels like confinement. You try to hold on, thinking maybe something's wrong with you, maybe you've lost your way. But what's really happening is divine intervention. God is shifting the ground beneath your feet because your roots have gone as deep as they can in that soil. You've learned what you were meant to learn there. You've given what you were meant to give. Now the same environment that once nurtured you can no longer sustain you. It's not a loss. It's a call to growth. Many people mistake this kind of divine disconnection for rejection. They think God is punishing them, that life is falling apart, or that they've made some terrible mistake. But the truth is, sometimes God has to disturb your peace to awaken your purpose. He will close doors you thought would never shut. He will end friendships you thought were forever. He will shift your comfort zones until you have no choice but to move, because He knows that if He doesn't make you uncomfortable, you'll stay in places that no longer serve your destiny. You'll keep shrinking to fit into spaces you've already outgrown. Think about the story of Abraham. God told him, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." Notice, God didn't tell Abraham exactly where he was going. He just said, "Go." That's what faith feels like. It's packing your bags without knowing the destination, trusting that wherever God leads, it's better than where you are. Abraham had to leave behind everything familiar to receive everything promised. In the same way, you can't stay where it's safe and expect to see what's sacred. Sometimes you have to walk away from the known to step into the divine unknown. When God removes you from where you no longer belong, He's protecting your spirit from stagnation. Maybe the people around you don't celebrate your growth anymore. Maybe your workplace feels draining. Maybe the conversations you used to enjoy now sound empty. These are signs of spiritual misalignment. You're no longer vibrating on the same frequency as the environment you once thrived in. It's not arrogance, it's elevation. God has deposited something new inside you, and that new anointing cannot coexist with old patterns. The soil that once produced fruit can become toxic if you refuse to move when God says move. It's also important to understand that when God begins to separate you, He does it quietly. There's rarely an announcement, no warning sign, no grand revelation. One day you just realize you don't fit anymore. You can't explain it, but your spirit feels restless. That's divine discontent. It's heaven's way of telling you you've stayed here long enough. It's not that the place was bad. It's just that your time there has expired, just like manna in the wilderness. What once fed you can start to rot if you try to keep it longer than God intended. His grace is always on the move, and if you cling to what He's left, you'll miss where He's leading. There's also a spiritual law at play here. Anything that refuses to evolve begins to erode. God is too invested in your destiny to let you settle for less than what He created you for. So when He starts to remove you from a certain place, it's His mercy in disguise. He's saying, "You're too big for this now. You've outgrown this stage. I have more for you." And though it may hurt, that pain is proof of transformation. Caterpillars don't become butterflies without discomfort. The cocoon is confining, but it's necessary. It's in that tight, uncomfortable place that the wings are formed. You too may be in that sacred tension, caught between what was and what's coming. But trust that God is shaping you for flight. Sometimes you'll even lose people you love deeply in this process. They'll misunderstand your growth. They'll think you've changed, and they'll be right. You have changed. You're not who you were when they met you, and that's the point. Growth always costs something. The price of elevation is often separation, but what feels like abandonment is actually alignment. God will never take away something without replacing it with something greater, something more fitting for your next level. So don't mourn what's leaving. Make room for what's coming. When God removes you from where you no longer belong, He's not just changing your environment. He's transforming your identity. He's calling you from dependency to destiny. The comfort of old surroundings can no longer contain the magnitude of your purpose. You're being led into a season where your faith will be your foundation, not familiarity. You won't be sustained by who you know, but by what you believe. It's a spiritual migration, from needing validation to walking in revelation. Every move, every loss, every closed door, it's all orchestrated by divine timing. So don't fight the shift, trust it. You're not being cast out, you're being called higher. The season that once held you has served its purpose. Now it's time to step into the land where you truly belong, the one God prepared for you, long before you even knew you'd need to move. Validation is one of the most subtle prisons the human soul can ever live in. It doesn't come with bars or chains. It comes with likes, with approval, with applause, with the subtle nods of people who say, "You're doing well." And suddenly that becomes your fuel. You start living not to fulfill God's purpose, but to please the crowd. You measure your worth by the reactions of others, and when those reactions fade, so does your sense of value. But God never intended for your identity to depend on human validation. He designed you to stand firm in the knowledge that you were chosen, loved, and appointed long before anyone's opinion ever existed. So when He begins to remove validation from your life, it's not to humiliate you, it's to liberate you. The need for validation is born when we forget who we are in God. Somewhere along the line, we start craving confirmation from people who didn't create us, approval from those who can't see the full picture of our destiny. We seek their acceptance because it feels tangible, immediate, comforting. But what happens when the applause stops? What happens when the same people who cheered for you yesterday are silent today? If your worth is built on their approval, your confidence collapses with their absence. That's why God steps in and begins the painful but necessary process of cutting those strings. He's not trying to isolate you from love. He's trying to protect you from dependency. Because as long as your confidence depends on others, your calling will remain limited. Validation feels good because it feeds the ego. It gives a temporary sense of worth, a surface-level satisfaction that makes you feel seen. But the problem is the same people who validate you today can invalidate you tomorrow. Their approval shifts with seasons, moods, and convenience. God's approval, on the other hand, never changes. He saw you when you were invisible. He called you worthy when you were still unsure. And He anointed you before anyone could applaud you. That's why he begins to strip away false validation to remind you that his affirmation is all you need. Once you understand that, you stop performing for people and start living for purpose. There's something profoundly powerful about a person who no longer needs to be validated by others. They move differently. They speak with authority. They walk with quiet confidence because they know their value doesn't fluctuate with opinion. That's the kind of person God is shaping you into. Every time you were overlooked, He was teaching you to find peace in being unseen. Every time you were misunderstood, He was strengthening your ability to stand in truth even when no one else understands it. Every time you were criticized, He was refining your humility. These moments are not accidents. They are spiritual training. God is teaching you to derive your confidence from Him, not from the fragile praise of man. Imagine what happens when a person no longer seeks validation. They become unstoppable. They're no longer afraid to fail because failure doesn't define them. They're no longer afraid of rejection because rejection doesn't wound them. Their decisions are no longer swayed by opinions because they operate from conviction, not comparison. This is the level of freedom God wants for you. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. It's not pride, it's peace. When your validation comes from heaven, no human criticism can shake you, and no human praise can inflate you. You simply walk in purpose, knowing that you're already approved. The irony is that the more you stop seeking validation, the more genuine respect you attract. People start noticing that quiet strength. They sense that you're not desperate for attention, and that authenticity draws them in. But even then, you learn to keep your eyes on God, because the moment you start craving that recognition again, you risk losing the freedom you fought to gain. Validation can feel sweet, but it's a dangerous addiction. It makes you depend on what's temporary to define what's eternal. That's why God breaks the cycle early. He allows seasons where no one notices you, where your work goes unseen, where your kindness goes unacknowledged, not to punish you, but to purify you. Think about Jesus. He didn't chase validation. He was despised, rejected, misunderstood, yet he never changed his mission to earn people's approval. His confidence came from knowing who sent him, not from who accepted him. That's the model for your life. When you live for the one who called you, you stop bending yourself for the crowd that criticizes you. And once you master that, you're finally ready to step into your divine purpose. Because God can only elevate a person whose heart is not ruled by validation. So if you find yourself in a season where no one claps for you, thank God. If people don't understand what you're doing, stay faithful. If they misinterpret your intentions, stay pure. You're not losing validation, you're losing dependence. God is stripping away the need for approval so that when He takes you higher, you won't crumble under pressure or pride. You'll walk with quiet assurance, knowing you're chosen not because the world said yes, but because God did. And when that truth becomes your anchor, you'll never need validation again. You'll move from seeking recognition to living in revelation. And that's where divine freedom truly begins. Isolation is one of God's most misunderstood gifts. To the human heart, it feels like abandonment. It feels like being forgotten, left behind or overlooked. But in truth, isolation is often where God does His most powerful work. It's not punishment, it's preparation. It's the sacred space where He silences every external voice so that you can finally recognize His. We live in a world that constantly demands our attention. Friends, family, social noise, endless distractions. And in that noise, it becomes difficult to discern what is from God and what is from people. So, God, in His wisdom, withdraws you from the crowd. He separates you, not because He's angry, but because He's trying to fine-tune your hearing. The quiet place is where clarity is born. When you find yourself suddenly alone, when doors close and conversations fade, your first instinct might be to question what went wrong. But what if nothing went wrong at all? What if you were being hidden for a reason? God hides those he intends to use. Before David ever faced Goliath, he was isolated in the fields, tending sheep. Before Joseph ever ruled in Egypt, he was imprisoned and forgotten. Before Jesus ever performed miracles, he spent 40 days alone in the wilderness. Isolation precedes revelation. It's where God strips away every false identity, every attachment, every distraction, until all that's left is the core of who you really are, the part of you that belongs entirely to Him. The silence of isolation can feel unbearable because it exposes everything we've been avoiding. It confronts the insecurities we've been masking with busyness. It forces us to sit with the very emotions we've been trying to outrun. But this is where transformation begins. When you're isolated, you're no longer sustained by people's words. You're sustained by God's whispers. You start to realize that peace isn't found in company. It's found in connection. You stop chasing validation and start embracing stillness. The isolation that once felt like a tomb begins to reveal itself as a womb, a place of rebirth, not death. You're not buried. You're being planted. God uses isolation to recalibrate your spirit. In the crowd, you can lose yourself trying to blend in, but in solitude, you rediscover your authenticity. The things that once seemed important, status, approval, recognition, start to lose their hold. You begin to crave substance over noise, depth over attention, and truth over popularity. That's when you start to see God's hand more clearly, not because He suddenly appeared, but because the noise that drowned Him out has finally quieted. Isolation removes the clutter, and in the emptiness, you find essence. It's a divine detox that cleanses your mind of people's expectations so you can align with heaven's instructions. There's something sacred about the seasons, when God removes everyone else from your story. It's as if He's saying, now that it's quiet, I can finally speak to you. And what He tells you in isolation often can't be shared with everyone. It's too precious, too personal, too sacred to be exposed to public opinion. That's why God hides it. Because revelation that's born in solitude must be protected until it's ready to manifest. When Joseph shared his dream too early, it led to betrayal. When Moses spoke prematurely, it led to delay. But when Jesus waited for His appointed time, it led to resurrection. So don't rush to escape the solitude. What God is birthing in silence will one day speak louder than anything you could ever say now. Another reason isolation is necessary is because it breaks your dependence on others. When you no longer have anyone to lean on, you learn to lean on God completely. And that's the foundation of unshakable faith. You realize that even if everyone leaves, He remains. Even if you lose every familiar voice, His still small voice will guide you. It's in that place of complete reliance that you grow spiritually strong. People who have walked through isolation carry a quiet confidence. They've met God in their wilderness, and once you've met Him there, no crowd can ever define you again. Think of it this way. Isolation isn't about being cut off. It's about being set apart. God removes you from the crowd not because you're unworthy of it, but because you're being prepared to lead it. He cannot elevate you publicly until He's refined you privately. Every great destiny is forged in silence before it's revealed in light. So, when you find yourself feeling invisible, remember that hidden doesn't mean forgotten. God hides what He values. He keeps treasures in secret places until the appointed time. That's what He's doing with you, protecting, shaping, and strengthening you for what's next. And when that isolation season ends, you'll emerge different, stronger, wiser, more grounded in your identity. The validation you once sought will no longer interest you, because you've already been validated by His presence. You'll speak with a new authority, because it's no longer borrowed from others, it's rooted in divine encounter. The very silence that once scared you will become the foundation of your strength. You'll look back and realize that the isolation wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to build you into someone who no longer depends on the world's approval, but thrives in God's presence alone. When God begins to call you into a new season, one of the first signs is that certain people start to fade from your life. It doesn't always happen with conflict or betrayal. Sometimes it's quiet, gradual, almost unnoticeable, until you look around and realize the circle you once had is smaller. This can feel painful, even confusing, because some of those people were dear to you. You shared memories, prayers, and dreams together. You thought they'd always walk with you, but here's a spiritual truth. Not everyone who started with you is meant to finish with you. When God prepares to elevate you, He must separate you from attachments that can't survive higher altitudes. Some relationships are seasonal, designed to shape you for a time but not carry you into eternity. And when that time ends, no amount of holding on can keep them from drifting away. It's human nature to want to bring everyone with us when we grow. We think that loyalty means never letting go. But true loyalty to God sometimes requires letting go of people who can't understand your new calling. You see, certain individuals are tied to your past identity, the version of you that doubted, that sought validation, that needed approval to move forward. They were connected to who you were, not to who you're becoming. And when you begin to transform, when your spirit begins to hunger for more of God and less of the world, they no longer recognize you. They might accuse you of changing, and they'd be right. You have changed. You can't carry the weight of old connections into a new destiny. The new you won't fit in old spaces. What used to feed your soul now feels like poison. What once brought joy now brings confusion. This is not rejection, it's redirection. Think about the story of Lot's wife. When God called Lot and his family to leave Sodom, He told them not to look back. But Lot's wife did. She couldn't let go of the life she was leaving, the people she knew, the comfort of familiarity. And because of that, she turned into a pillar of salt, frozen in the past. That's what happens when we refuse to let go of people God has already released. We become stuck, unable to move forward, trapped in memories of who we were, and resistant to who God is shaping us to be. Some of the people you love can't go where you're going, not because they're evil, but because their assignment in your story is complete. Keeping them close beyond their purpose only delays your progress. God is not cruel when He removes people from your life. He's careful. He sees things you can't. He hears conversations you never did. He knows which relationships will strengthen you and which will silently sabotage your growth. Sometimes the people you call comfort are the very ones keeping you from discovering your courage. You pray for elevation, but when God starts rearranging your connections, you fight Him, yet you can't soar with weights tied to your wings. Detachment isn't heartless, it's holy. It's how God purifies your journey, ensuring that your next season is built on alignment, not attachment. As you evolve spiritually, you'll notice that some people start misunderstanding your silence. They'll say you've become distant or cold, but really, you're just becoming focused. You've stopped chasing conversations that drain your spirit. You've stopped explaining your vision to those committed to misunderstanding it. This is growth. It's the quiet maturity that comes when you realize that not every connection deserves constant access. Protecting your peace doesn't mean you've stopped loving them. It means you've learned to love yourself enough to honor God's direction. When He says release, it's because He's preparing to replace. What's ahead of you requires lighter luggage. There's also a powerful spiritual principle hidden in this process: pruning. Jesus said, "Every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it so that it may bear more fruit." Pruning hurts. It's the cutting away of what looks alive but no longer serves purpose. Some people were essential to your growth in the past, but now their season in your life has ended. If you hold on out of guilt or fear, you'll hinder your own growth. The pruning is not punishment, it's preparation for multiplication. Every person who leaves makes space for what's truly meant to come. Every friendship that fades clears emotional room for divine alignment. God is never subtracting. He's always streamlining your path for destiny. And here's what's remarkable. You'll realize later that the people who couldn't go with you were never meant to understand your journey. They wouldn't have survived the tests you're about to face or understood the faith required for where you're headed. God doesn't remove them to isolate you. He removes them to insulate you. He's surrounding you with silence so that when new people enter your life, they'll be aligned with your purpose, not your past. You'll stop needing to explain your heart because they'll recognize your spirit. They'll see your growth not as arrogance, but as obedience. These are the divine connections God reserves for those willing to let go of the temporary to make room for the eternal. So when people start to drift, don't chase them. Bless them and release them. It's not your job to convince anyone to stay where God has called you to rise. If they belong in your next season, they'll meet you there. If not, trust that their absence is divine protection. Some losses are not losses. They're lessons wrapped in grace. The people who left made space for peace. The ones who walked away created room for destiny. And as you walk forward, lighter, freer, and more focused, you'll realize that every departure was a divine arrangement for your elevation. Not everyone can go where you're going, and that's exactly why you'll get there. There comes a time in every believer's journey when the world around them starts to feel smaller. Conversations that once thrilled you now feel hollow. The spaces that used to energize you now drain your spirit. You look around and realize that what once felt like home has turned into a cage. This is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that you've outgrown where you are. When God begins to elevate your spirit, your environment often stays the same for a while, and that mismatch creates discomfort. It's heaven's gentle way of telling you, you can't stay here anymore. You've reached the limit of what this place can teach you, and now God is preparing you for expansion. That's why things that used to satisfy no longer do. Your spirit is craving growth, and growth always starts with outgrowing. You see, spiritual evolution has a way of making comfort feel like confinement. When you were at a certain level, the people and places around you served their purpose. They helped you learn. They refined your patience, and they tested your character. But once those lessons are complete, God begins to pull you toward something greater. The tension you feel isn't failure, it's transition. It's what happens when destiny starts whispering louder than familiarity. And the truth is, if God didn't allow that discomfort to rise, you would stay attached to what's easy instead of stepping into what's extraordinary. Think about a seed planted in soil. For a while, that soil is home. It provides everything the seed needs. But there comes a moment when the seed begins to push against that soil. It starts to crack, to split open, to reach for the light. That breaking isn't destruction, it's development. The seed is outgrowing its environment, and what looks like breaking is actually becoming. The same is true for you. God is stretching you beyond what feels safe because you were never meant to stay buried. The darkness around you is not your destination, it's your launching ground. When you outgrow your old environment, you'll often face misunderstanding. People will say you've changed. They'll say you've become distant, too serious, too spiritual, too focused. But what they don't realize is that spiritual growth always looks like separation before it looks like transformation. You're not acting different, you are different. You're seeing things through eyes that have been opened. You've tasted a level of peace that can't coexist with chaos. You've experienced a depth of purpose that can't survive in shallow spaces. So you stop trying to fit into rooms where God is no longer present. That's not pride, it's protection. You're honoring the new level of awareness that God has birthed within you. There's also a deep spiritual law at work here. What no longer aligns must eventually dissolve. When your heart expands, but your surroundings don't, the vibration becomes mismatched. You start to feel drained instead of fulfilled, restless instead of rooted. That's God stirring your spirit to move. Sometimes you even try to stay out of guilt or obligation, thinking, maybe I can make this work. But the truth is, you can't bloom in soil that's no longer fertile. Staying in old environments out of fear of change is like trying to live off stale air. It may keep you alive, but it will never let you breathe. Growth requires fresh atmosphere. Remember how the Israelites longed to go back to Egypt, even after God had delivered them? They wanted the familiarity of slavery over the uncertainty of freedom. That's what happens when we resist growth. We mistake comfort for safety. But God didn't bring you this far to return you to bondage. When He begins to move you, it's because He sees something greater ahead. The wilderness may feel lonely, but it's where God provides manna. It's where you learn dependence, faith, and endurance. What feels like loss is often the path to liberty. You're not being pushed out, you're being pulled higher. It's important to realize that when you outgrow an environment, the old one will sometimes resent you. People may mock your faith, question your choices, or minimize your growth. That's because your transformation exposes their stagnation. When you start walking in truth, it unsettles those who are comfortable with lies. But don't dim your light to make them feel comfortable in their shadows. Let them talk, let them assume. While they speak, you'll be moving. While they criticize, you'll be climbing. God will vindicate the growth that others can't comprehend. One of the most painful but liberating lessons in spiritual life is learning that elevation requires elimination. You cannot soar with the same wings that carried you through your last season. God will prune relationships, desires, and even opportunities that once looked promising. It may feel unfair at first, but every pruning is a preparation for greater fruit. He's creating room for new blessings, new connections, new wisdom that couldn't enter while you were surrounded by the old. When you finally surrender to this process, you'll feel peace settle where resistance once lived. You'll stop clinging and start trusting. And when you look back later, you'll understand why it had to happen. The rooms that once fit you will look smaller. The conversations that once impressed you will sound shallow, and the fears that once controlled you will feel distant. Because you've grown. You've been transformed from someone who needed acceptance into someone who walks in purpose. The stretching, the solitude, the discomfort. It was all divine. You weren't breaking down. You were breaking through. You were outgrowing what could no longer contain the greatness God placed within you. And now, as you step into your next chapter, you'll do so lighter, freer, and fully aware that leaving behind what's small is never loss. It's preparation for what's sacred. Heaven's validation carries a weight that no human praise could ever match. The applause of people is fleeting. It fades as quickly as it rises. One moment they celebrate you, the next they forget your name. But when God approves of you, that approval becomes eternal. It doesn't depend on your performance, your popularity, or your perfection. It depends on His purpose. And once He sets His seal on your life, no one can remove it. This is why God often allows seasons where no one sees what you're doing. He hides you in plain sight so that your foundation is built on His validation, not theirs. Because if your confidence comes from the crowd, you'll crumble when the crowd disappears. But if it comes from heaven, no earthly rejection can shake it. Many people spend their lives chasing recognition, never realizing that human approval is one of the weakest currencies in existence. It has no eternal value. It fluctuates with emotions, jealousy, and misunderstanding. The same hands that clap for you today can point against you tomorrow. God's validation, however, is rooted in truth. It's anchored in the eternal. When He validates you, He's not just approving of what you do, He's affirming who you are. You're not valuable because the world says so. You're valuable because He created you with divine intention. Every hidden act of faith, every tear shed in silence, every sacrifice made in secret, all of it has been recorded by heaven. God keeps account of what man overlooks. Think about David. Before he ever held a crown, he was a shepherd boy in the fields. No one saw him, no one clapped for him, but God did. While others were being admired publicly, David was being anointed privately. And that's the beauty of divine validation. It doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need likes or applause. It only needs obedience. God's favor found David in obscurity, and when the time was right, He brought him before the world. That's what God does. He validates you in private before He showcases you in public. Because if you're not strong enough to stand unseen, you won't be strong enough to stand when everyone's watching. When you live for heaven's validation, your motives change. You stop striving to impress and start focusing on being faithful. You no longer measure your worth by outcomes, but by obedience. The peace that comes from knowing you've pleased God outweighs any approval this world could offer. It's a quiet confidence that says, even if no one understands me, He does. And that's where true freedom begins. Because the moment you stop needing recognition, you start walking in revelation. You begin to understand that your assignment was never about being liked. It was about being used by God to fulfill His purpose through you. Sometimes God will even let people misunderstand you to strengthen your dependence on Him. He'll allow you to be overlooked, criticized, or forgotten, not to humiliate you, but to purify your intentions. He's testing whether you'll still serve when no one says thank you, whether you'll still love when no one reciprocates, whether you'll still stand when no one applauds. Those are the moments that shape warriors of faith, because heaven watches differently than the world. Man sees the spotlight, but God sees the struggle behind it. He measures your heart, not your image. And when your heart remains pure despite being unseen, He starts to elevate you beyond explanation. Heaven's validation doesn't look like fame, it looks like favor. It's not always visible to others, but it's undeniable in its results. Doors begin to open that no one can explain. People begin to help you without knowing why. Miracles unfold quietly, and opportunities align perfectly. That's the mark of divine approval, when God begins to move in ways that no human hand can take credit for. You don't have to announce it. It announces itself. That's why Scripture says, when you humble yourself, God will exalt you in due time. Heaven's timing is never rushed, but it's always right. And when your validation comes from Him, your rise can't be stopped by them. You might feel unseen right now, but don't mistake invisibility for insignificance. Some of God's greatest work is done in secret. You're not being ignored, you're being refined. The quiet season is where character is built. The world claps for talent, but heaven validates integrity. That's why God takes his time. He's not interested in short-term recognition. He's preparing you for long-term impact. When the spotlight finally finds you, you'll be ready. Not because the world approved you, but because God already did. So, when no one notices your effort, when your kindness goes unacknowledged, when your faithfulness seems forgotten, remember this: heaven saw it all. The angels witnessed every prayer you whispered through tears. God heard every word you spoke in faith when no one was listening. You are not invisible to the one who created visibility itself. And one day, when the time is right, he'll reward you openly for everything you endured quietly. His validation is not about recognition, it's about revelation. He's revealing who you truly are, not just to the world, but to yourself. And when you finally see your worth through his eyes, you'll understand why you never needed theirs. There's a peace that comes when you no longer need to prove who you are. When you stop defending your worth, stop explaining your calling, and stop chasing recognition, something powerful happens. You begin to live from revelation instead of recognition. That's what this next season of your life is about. God is taking you into a place where your confidence will come from clarity, not from compliments. You'll no longer need to announce your arrival or seek approval for your purpose, because your life itself will testify. The transformation God has done in you will speak louder than anything you could ever say. What used to require explanation will now require observation. People won't need you to tell them who you are. They'll see it in how you move, how you endure, how you glow differently when peace replaces pressure. For too long, you've lived on the edge of other people's opinions. You've waited for their acknowledgement before believing in your own anointing. But God is breaking that cycle. He's removing the need for recognition so that your obedience becomes your greatest statement. You don't need to tell the world what you're becoming. Just become it. You don't need to prove your value. Just walk in it. The more you focus on revelation, the more recognition becomes irrelevant. Because when God reveals who you are, no one can conceal it. And when he chooses to keep you hidden, no one can reveal you before time. That's divine timing, the rhythm of destiny that never rushes and never fails. Revelation is different from recognition. Recognition is about being seen by men. Revelation is about being known by God. Recognition depends on external validation, applause, approval, admiration. Revelation flows from within. It's the divine awareness of who you are and why you're here. Recognition feeds the ego, but revelation nourishes the soul. Recognition fades when the lights go out, but revelation grows stronger in the dark. When you live by revelation, your purpose doesn't collapse under silence, and your faith doesn't crumble under misunderstanding. Because you're not driven by visibility, you're anchored by vision. That's the kind of strength God is building in you. There will come a time when people who doubted you will begin to see what God saw in you all along. They'll wonder how you endured so much in silence, how you kept walking without validation, how you kept believing without applause. And that's when the revelation will reveal itself. It won't be a loud victory. It will be a quiet unveiling. The favor of God will start to show in your life in ways that can't be denied or explained. You won't have to say, "I told you so." You'll simply live in such peace that your existence will prove that you were chosen. That's what happens when revelation replaces recognition. The results speak for themselves. When you reach that place, you'll find that your joy no longer depends on acknowledgement. You'll start to celebrate your own growth in private. You'll thank God for progress no one else noticed. You'll cherish the victories that don't make headlines, because you'll know they matter in heaven. The validation of man begins to lose its flavor, when you've tasted the approval of God. Suddenly, the claps don't sound as sweet as his whisper saying, "I'm proud of you." And once you've heard that whisper, nothing else compares. You stop performing for people and start walking in peace. You realize that the audience of one is enough. God is preparing you to carry a light so powerful that you won't need to beg for attention. It will simply attract what's aligned with your destiny. Your character will become your introduction. Your consistency will become your platform. Your integrity will become your spotlight. That's the beauty of living by revelation. Everything that's meant for you recognizes you when the time is right. You don't chase it, you attract it. You don't strive, you flow. You stop competing for validation and start creating from vision. That's when destiny accelerates, when you stop running after what was never meant to be earned. Understand this: God hides you until you can handle being seen. He withholds recognition until revelation becomes your anchor. If you're validated too soon, the applause can distract you from the assignment. But when you've been through the refining fire, when you've walked through isolation and silence and surrender, you no longer need recognition to stay faithful. You serve from overflow, not from emptiness. You love without expecting to be loved back. You give without needing to be seen. That's when God knows you're ready, because only those who can stay humble unseen can stay grounded when seen. So where God is taking you, you won't need recognition to remind you of your value. You won't need validation to confirm your direction. You'll walk in the quiet strength of someone who knows that revelation is enough. And as you do, the fruit of your life will testify to the favor you carry. The peace in your eyes will speak of a love the world can't give. The grace in your steps will reflect a confidence no opinion can destroy. You will move with divine assurance, not loud, not desperate, but steady, radiant, and untouchable, because you'll finally know what few ever do, that when you are validated by heaven, recognition on earth becomes unnecessary. So now, as you stand on the edge of this new chapter, remember what God has been preparing you for all along. Every moment of rejection, every season of silence, every tear that fell without comfort, it was all shaping you for a destination where you would no longer need to be seen to know that you are chosen. You were never meant to live at the mercy of people's approval. You were meant to live from the certainty of God's affirmation. The same hands that once clung to others for validation are now being lifted in surrender, ready to carry purpose instead of permission. Pack your bags, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally, because where God is taking you, applause will sound small and recognition will seem shallow. You are being called into a life of quiet strength, where your peace is proof of His presence and your confidence flows from conviction, not compliments. This is the freedom you've been praying for, to walk into every room knowing that even if no one understands your calling, heaven already celebrates it. You're not moving because you need to prove anything. You're moving because you've outgrown needing to. The world won't understand your journey, but that's because it was never meant to. You were chosen not to be popular, but to be purposeful. And in this next season, you'll see what it means to live fully validated, not by people's applause, but by God's unshakable approval. So go. Step forward with courage. The world may not recognize it yet, but heaven already knows your time has come.